All right, so that should have worked. Hey, Internet. I'm going to answer a question real quick for you, and hopefully you can chime in a little bit. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat if you find me while I'm live, but I don't tend to be too live for long. My hope is to set up a situation in which I come on live for short bits to answer your questions rather than have to type them out and so forth. So what I want to do today is answer a question that I have from somebody local here that was sent to me in an email. And so I'm talking to you. I'm not going to call you up by name, but I'm actually making this video for you. I think it's a really good question, and I think it'll be helpful for other people as well to hear the answer, so that's why I'm sharing it this way. Plus, I think maybe I can do a little more with my words than I could if I was typing it. So here's the question. It says, Pastor, I want to get your thoughts on something. Do you think that it is ever okay to give your offering to someone who is in need instead of to the church? Now, there are two, maybe three things to keep in mind here. The first thing is, first of all, you think the first thing is, first of all? The first thing is that the Lord wants you to be a cheerful giver. That isn't a law. That's not like a rule, like you better be cheerful while you give or it doesn't count, right? The idea is that Christians are inspired to help people. And when we are, this is a good thing. And so if you're inspired to help somebody, you should help that person. That's a good thing. So that's the first thing. Do with your gifts as you are driven to do with your gifts, and don't feel any guilt about that. But the second thing is to recognize that it's not as though God only has given you so much to give to anyone, right? God has given you everything you have to share with everyone. And I think a good illustration of this, although it is not a law for us as New Testament Christians, a good illustration of this is that in the Old Testament, you had the tithe, which was the amount of money that was prescribed. It was commanded for you to give that money to what today we would call the church, right? It wasn't the church back then. It was the temple, or it was, well, yeah, long and short, it was the temple. You were required to give 10% to that, and then you would give what was called offerings, which would be over and above that 10%, also to the temple, right? So that there were these free will offerings. So you hear people talk about tithes and offerings. That's not saying the same thing. Those are two different things. You have the 10% you are required to give. You have the other percentages that you can give because you want to, because you care about the temple and the life of the temple and the way in which it brings God's word and sacrament to you, Old Testament style. And then, right, then you would want to help the sojourner at your gate, or you would want to help the poor in your street. And so, at least the way the Old Testament kind of saw or envisioned the perfect life, it would involve more and more and more giving without sort of like setting a limit on what we give and then saying, well, now I'm going to give it up. Now, or I'm going to give it here, but not there. Now, to be fair, I'm not asking you to give 35% of your income. I don't think that's very realistic, although it would be wonderful, right? But it's not very realistic in our day with the kind of income and the way we handle money as we do. But it is important to see that well, no, I'm going to step back. You also have the issue then of being on it, perhaps, I don't know about you personally, but a semi-fixed income, right? So you do only have so much you can give without not fulfilling your debts that you might have to other people. So if you've agreed to pay a heating bill and you use the heat, you need to pay that debt. And so, yes, so maybe you only have so much money that you can actually give to church every month without starving to death, and that's how much you can give. So if the question is then, can I take that money and give it to somebody else? Default back to my first answer. The answer is yes, sort of, with a caveat, because the answer's why, right? What are you wanting to achieve? And are you viewing this as something you're doing for God? Because there's a big difference between making sure that word and sacrament, that the proclamation of Christ crucified for you remains here for you and others around you to hear, and helping your neighbor in their time of need, physically speaking. And there's a history in America, particularly, of confusing these two. In fact, at my congregation that I serve now, I'll hear people talk about mission, and by mission they mean collecting old glasses to send overseas, right? That's not mission. That's not what Christianity is sent to do. Is it a good thing to do? Yes. It's a very good thing to do. It's a good thing to help other people, but that's not what the church is and what the church does. So there is a massive difference between giving money to the general offering plate in the congregation, the majority of which is going to go to make sure my salary gets paid, honestly, to make sure that I can stay here proclaiming the gospel to you, and helping somebody put food on their table or pay their heating bill. Both of them are good, but they're very different things. It's not like a one-to-one, right? But if you're in a situation where your heart is like, I got to help this person, they need this money now, this is all I have this month, is it wrong of me to give it to them instead of to the church? No, it's not wrong of you. It's not wrong of you. It's kind of you, right? Just recognize that it's not like it's doing the same work. It's not. It's not doing the same work. It's doing a very different work in the community. Now, there's another side of this, and it depends, kind of on who you are. So this is not necessarily just for you, my member who asked the question. If you have made a commitment to give a certain amount to the church for the sake of the year, which some of us here at St. Paul did do at my request, in order that we might budget and plan a little bit better, if you've made that commitment, you've told somebody, I'm giving you this much money, then it's not really a cool thing to then not do that, right? That's like having a debt that you don't pay. Now, before you would starve, I would tell you, don't give us the money. Yeah. And even in this moment, I would say, ultimately, if your heart is just so in need, you're turning on this poor person's heat and they're going to die in this -30 weather we had a week and a half ago without you giving them the money. Well, then give them the money, right? Yeah, they need it. But don't confuse charity with supporting Word and Sacrament ministry. Remember that everybody wants to support charity, and very few people are willing to give to Word and Sacrament ministry. Amazingly, that's why so many churches struggle. It's why it's hard to send missionaries overseas. And so don't confuse those two things. And then remember that if you make a commitment to your church, if your church is relying on your giving, then you can actually put your congregation into dire straits. If everybody were to do that, like let's say this month, everybody just decides to help somebody else instead of giving the money to the church. And we say, oh, we're giving to God. Yeah, but then your church closes, right? Then your church closes. And then you have nowhere to go to receive Word and Sacrament, to receive the gospel and the word taught and proclaimed to you, to have the Lord's Supper given to you, to have somebody call on you when you're sick and dying yourself, right? So don't commingle the two. But it's not as though the New Testament life has this prescription of you'd better give this much, 'cause at the same time, the reflection of the Old Testament shadow is not that the shadow would go away. It's not that the 10% tithe and offering would disappear. It's that we don't need to be commanded to do that. We don't need to be compelled like a donkey being beat with a stick to do that anymore. But when we learn that that's the right thing to do, we try to reach for that and do that. And that's why, so for example, as we went through our stewardship pledge drive this last fall, we talked about not jumping all the way to a tithe right away. It's very impossible for most people to do that, but to take a small step up and to plan to work your way toward that small step up tithe over the course of 5-10 years or so, right? So you get to that point where you are out of the desire to support your congregation and the preaching of the word and to call a missionary into the area and send them into the downtown area or whatever we might end up doing, right? To support that joyfully because you want to do it because it's a good thing to do. And then to recognize that caring for your neighbor outside of the congregation is a different thing. And that's also a good thing to do. They shouldn't be equated with each other. I'm going to glance over here at the questions for I can't even read it. It's too small. This is trying to see what's going, for Pete's sake, computer. Can I see that there? I'm just going to read a couple of the comments from the commenters and respond to them quickly here. So Vernie, who's watching, says, I'm a student and money obviously is tight. So I can't always give money to church, but I want to help out church by making Lutheran games to help teach Word and Sacrament ministry. Well, if you can figure out a way to do that, and I would encourage you, even if money is tight, I read something, no, it wasn't Reddit. I heard something recently, Tony Robbins, of all people. I can't recommend him wholeheartedly, but he has some wisdom here and there, which is why thousands and thousands of people listen to him. And he said, look, if you're unwilling to give to charity when you make $100 a month, you're not going to be willing when you make $1 million a month. It's like, well, that's interesting. If I can't share $5, well, it makes me think I'm going to share $500, right? I'm not going to be able to do that either. So there's something to that. Money is tight. Okay. So are you ashamed to give $1? Are you ashamed to give $5? It's half of it's the practice, right? And giving just enough that it might hurt just a little, right? That you have to give up just a little bit of something that you thought you could have had. It's called sacrifice. It's good for us, right? It's good for us. So just something to think about there, Vernie, although I appreciate it. I was a student too. And I also habitually am not always the best giver. I'm working on improving that as I teach about it. And Texas says, I think supporting your church might be like supporting your kids. You can try and help another kid out, but you really need to take care of your kid. That's true in a lot of ways. And it's not as though money that goes to the church doesn't go to help people via charity in a number of different directions. So at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Rockford, we send some money on to district, which goes on to the LCMS, which then in fact turns into some mercy work. So that happens that way. Are there too many administrative costs along the way? Well, you can take that up with your DP and synodical president. Not my answer, right? We also, though, immediately turn and give money into the local Rockford community. We have a couple of things that we support, food kitchen, things like that. So things we can't do on our own, but that we can make sure happen in the area. So we have that as well. And there was one other thing I was going to say, that there's another way that we do something locally with charity as well, but I can't think of it now. So the point being that, that's what it is. We also have a specialized budget, or a corner of the budget, which exists for when members of the congregation are in dire need. They need to contact the church office or me, but they are, and we maybe haven't done a great enough job publicizing this. A lot of things this year to pick up, right? I'm talking to my member, a lot of new stuff, a lot of things to kind of fix. But they can contact me or another pastor or an elder or whatever if they're nervous about it, and ask for help in that situation. And we have a amount of money that's there in order to help make that happen, and we will meet those needs. So it's not as though giving to church doesn't eventually get to charity, but notice how it keeps it kind of localized as well. And this is valuable in a sense. It protects you from being taken advantage of, particularly in a sense, because one of the things I would do if someone comes who is a member and asks is I'm going to ask what they need. If they're just saying I'm hard up for money, give me some money, not just going to do that, right? If they're going to say our heating bill isn't on, I'm going to say, can I please have your heating bill? I'll pay it for you, right? I'm still not just going to give you the money. So we're going to make sure that the person isn't taking advantage of the situation. Same thing goes for the food bank locally. One of the reasons we do that is so that we don't have individuals bouncing from congregation to congregation to congregation, not just ours, but others locally, and saying, I'm in need of food, please give me some money. And they'll hit up 3 or 4 different congregations and get quite a bit of money out of that. Say, no, go down here. There's food there. Yeah. Oh, I don't like them. They make me actually have to follow their rules. Well, yeah. Right. They ask you not to take advantage of them. So giving through the congregation, even to charity, does eventually get to helping others in the local community and protecting you from being taken advantage of, but somebody who's asking for money and maybe doesn't need it. I'll give you one more story on this. There's an individual who I know in my life, extended family member, who is regularly hard up for cash, and is not just with family members, but with all sorts of people. Has made quite several years living, kind of bouncing around and just always having always a story. And it's amazing how many people are willing to believe that out of the goodness of their heart. At a certain point, though, you realize you're maybe not helping them at that point. Yeah, maybe not helping them. So I hope this helps you kind of think this through. And those of you who watched live, I appreciate you watching it. My goal here is to maybe pull a few more of these live answers. I got a question from my dad, of all people. I'm going to try to answer in the next couple of days and be on a little more regularly for short snippets of time with this. It is Project Resurrection, although it's YouTube and it's not called that yet and all this. But yeah, Project Resurrection. If you haven't found the podcast, Project Resurrection, projectresurrection.blog, go check it out. And thank you for the question. I hope the answer has helped. We'll see you soon. That's not where I wanted to go.